The palace was waking. Servants rushed through narrow halls, hands full of silk and scrolls. Birds called from the rooftops. Light poured into the courtyards, soft and golden. But in the back wing, near the Garden of Stones, the world was still, quiet. That was where Elin Hua liked to be. She walked alone, carrying a tray of dried herbs and a small clay bowl. Her steps were careful, and her eyes stayed low. She wore a plain green robe, tied at the waist with a faded sash. Her hair, dark, brown and a little messy, was pulled into a simple knot. She wasn't anyone important, just an apothecary, one of many, but she was good with hands, and quiet, and invisible, which in the palace was a blessing. Elin turned down a side path, the one others avoided. It led to the Garden of Whispering Stones, where they said strange things happened. The trees grew crooked. The birds never sang. Some even believed it was cursed. She didn't care. The garden was empty, peaceful, safe. Or so she thought. She stopped. There was someone there. At first, she only saw the blue of his robe, half hidden behind a low tree. Then she saw the way he knelt, one hand pressed to his side. His head was bowed. His chest rose and fell in short, sharp breaths. He was hurt. She stepped closer. "Sir?" she asked. The man didn't respond. She looked at his face, or rather, what she could see of it. A black cloth mask covered his mouth and nose. His eyes were partly hidden by long strands of dark hair, but they were open, watching her. She should have walked away. She should have called a guard, but instead, Elin knelt beside him. "I have water," she said, lifting the bowl. Still, he said nothing. She brought it closer. His eyes narrowed, suspicious, alert. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered. He took the bowl, just one sip, then another. Elin reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch. Inside were strips of clean cloth and dried golden root. Good for bleeding. She didn't ask permission. She just moved his hand away and looked at the wound. It was deep, red, still fresh. "You're lucky," she said softly. "Another inch and you'd be gone." He raised an eyebrow, a small reaction, but a reaction. She worked. Quickly, her fingers moved with practiced care, cleaning, pressing, wrapping, all while the garden stayed silent. When she finished, she sat back. "I don't know who you are," she said. He tilted his head. "And I don't need to." She stood. "Rest if you want. No one comes here." He watched her turn to leave. "Wait." The voice was low, rough, but clear. She paused. "Your name?" he asked. She looked back at him. "Elin," she said. "Elin Hua." He nodded, once, then silence again. She left without another word, her heart beating fast, but not with fear, with something else. That night she didn't sleep well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The way his hand trembled, the way his voice sounded, the way his eyes watched her, not like a stranger, but like someone trying to remember something long forgotten. She didn't know why it stayed with her. Maybe it was because he didn't treat her like a servant. Maybe it was because she had finally done something that felt important. Or maybe it was because deep down, something told her this wasn't over. And she was right. At sunrise, they came for her. Not one, not two, but 6 guards in black armor, faces hidden. "Elin Hua?" one of them asked. She stepped out of her small room in the infirmary wing. "Yeah, you're to come with us, now." She looked around. The hallway was empty. No one had seen them arrive. "Why?" "The 4th prince has summoned you." Her blood ran cold. The 4th prince? Everyone in the palace had heard stories that he had vanished, that he had been betrayed, that he wore a mask because his face was no longer his own. Some said he lived only in the shadows now, a ghost in royal robes. But why would he want her? "Are you sure?" she asked. The guard held up a scroll with the imperial seal, a dragon with no eyes. It was real. "Elin Hua," he repeated. "Come." Now." The guards did not speak as they led her through the palace. They moved quickly, but not roughly. Elin followed, without a word, her heart beating like a drum. She had never been summoned before. Apothecaries did not get summoned, especially not by princes. The path was unfamiliar. They passed through gates she had never seen, walked beneath high-carved arches, and turned into a quiet courtyard filled with golden light and silence. Birds fluttered somewhere above, but the only sound she heard was the steady echo of boots, on stone. Finally, they stopped at a pavilion near the edge of the palace grounds. The doors were tall, wooden, closed. The lead guard turned to her. "He is inside," he said. Then they left. Just like that. Elin stood alone, staring at the doors. She didn't move. What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't? Before she could decide, the doors opened. A servant stepped out, bowed silently, and held the door for her. She walked in. The room was wide and warm, with long silk curtains hanging from the ceiling, and golden light spilling through tall lattice windows. A scent of incense floated in the air. And at the far end, seated in a wooden chair, was him. The man from the garden. He wore a dark robe, more elegant now, with gold along the edges. His mask was the same, black, simple, covering from nose to chin. His long hair was brushed back, tied with a silver clasp. His eyes were on her. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. Finally he rose. "Elin Hua," he said. His voice was the same as yesterday, rough but steady, quiet but strong. "You remember," she said softly. "I never forget," he answered. She swallowed. "I didn't know who you were. That's why I trusted you." She looked at the floor. "I wasn't supposed to find you." "No," he agreed, "but I'm glad you did." He walked toward her, slow and measured. When he stopped, he was just a few steps away. "You treated my wound," he said. "You gave me water. You spoke without fear. I didn't know I should be afraid. Now you do?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure." He studied her face. "I want you to stay," he said. "Here, in this pavilion." Elin's eyes widened. "Why?" "You're a healer," he said, "and I have more wounds than you saw." She blinked. "What kind of wounds?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and gestured to the space around them. "You'll have your own room. Food, peace. No one enters here unless I allow it." She frowned slightly. "And if I say no?" He paused, then looked at her. "I don't give orders the way others do, but I'll ask you plainly, Elin Hua. Stay." She stayed. That night she was given a small room near the back of the pavilion, with wooden walls, clean sheets, a low bed, and a window that looked out over the silent garden. There were no guards at her door, no locks, but she knew this place was different. This was not a servant's corner. This was something else. That night she couldn't sleep. Too many questions, too many thoughts. Why her? Why now? And who was he, really? He hadn't said his name, not once. But the guards had called him Fourth Prince. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. The lost son of the emperor. The boy who vanished after the fire in the East Wing. The man who returned with a mask and a silence too deep to break. They said he was cold, cursed, maybe dangerous. But in the garden he hadn't seemed dangerous. He had seemed tired and kind. The next morning she stepped into the courtyard. He was already there, standing beneath the trees with his hands behind his back. When he saw her, he nodded once. "Elin." "Good morning, my lord," she said, bowing. "I told you not to call me that." She straightened slowly. "Then what should I call you?" He looked at her, and then, for the first time, he spoke his name. "Kael." She repeated it in her mind. Kael. It didn't sound like a prince's name. It sounded like a man's name. Strong, real, wounded. He turned away and walked toward the far end of the courtyard. "I want to show you something," he said. Elin followed. The path was narrow. Stone tiles curved through a small grove of trees, their branches twisted with age. The light here was softer, filtered by leaves. Everything felt older, quieter, as if time moved more slowly in this part of the palace. Kael walked ahead of her, his steps silent. Elin followed without asking where they were going. She didn't need to. She was curious but not afraid. Not yet. At the end of the path, they reached a small structure. It looked like a tea house, but older, with faded paint and worn edges. He opened the door. Inside, it was simple. A table, 2 cushions, shelves filled with scrolls and jars of dried herbs. "This was my mother's place," Kael said. Elin looked around. "It's quiet here." She liked silence. He moved to the shelves and ran his fingers over the spines of old books. "She was the one who taught me to read, before the court cared who I was." Elin stood still. She didn't speak. "She died when I was 12, he said. After that, the palace felt bigger, louder, colder. He turned to her. "I come here when I need to remember how to breathe." Elin nodded. "I think everyone needs a place like that." He watched her for a long time. "You're not like the others," he said. She raised her eyebrows slightly. "Because I don't ask questions?" "No," he replied, "because you care." She looked down, her voice soft. "I don't know why I do, but I do." Kael sat slowly on one of the cushions. "Will you sit with me?" Elin hesitated only a moment before sitting across from him. They didn't talk for a while. Outside, the breeze moved the leaves. Somewhere, a bird called. But inside, there was only the sound of breath, and the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. Days passed. Not many. Just enough for Elin to begin to know the rhythm of his world. He woke early, ate little, spoke even less to anyone else. But with her, he was present. He listened. He asked small questions about herbs, about childhood memories, about things that didn't matter but somehow meant everything. He didn't laugh, not yet. But his voice softened when he said her name. One afternoon, she found him seated beneath a tall window, sunlight resting on his mask like a golden ribbon. He was holding a thin scroll. When she approached, he looked up. "This is a poem," he said. "She used to read it to me." Elin sat beside him. "Would you like to read it out loud?" she asked. He looked at the words again. "No," he said. "I want to hear you read it." She took the scroll, unrolled it, and began. Her voice was soft. The poem spoke of rain and rivers and a lost traveler. It was simple but full of emotion, like a whisper from the past. When she finished, she looked at him. Kael was still, but his eyes were not cold. There was something deep there, something raw. "Thank you," he said. And for a moment, she saw him not as a prince or a patient, but as a man, alone in a palace too big for his grief. That evening, as she prepared to return to her room, she paused at the door. "Kael," she said. He looked up. "Why did you really call me here?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly he said, "Because you didn't ask who I was in the garden. You just helped me. And now I'm trying to remember how to help someone else." Elin didn't know what to say, so she bowed her head and walked away. But in her heart, something had changed. She wasn't just tending a wound. She was becoming one. Elin woke before the sun. The room the prince had given her was small but warm. The walls were painted with soft brushstrokes of flowers and branches, and the window overlooked the inner courtyard where the wind carried the smell of tea leaves. She rose quietly, brushed her hair, and tied it with a faded green ribbon. Each day now began with silence, but not the kind that felt cold, the kind that held possibility. When she arrived in the courtyard, Kael was already there. He stood, near the edge of the garden, hands behind his back, looking at the koi pond. His robe fluttered gently in the breeze. He didn't turn when she approached. "Elin," he said, "what would you do if you had no name?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "I'd still be me," she said, "even if no one knew." "What to call me?" Kael nodded. And if the name you had became a burden, I'd find someone who saw me without it. He finally turned to her. I think I already have. She felt her cheeks warm. She lowered her eyes. Kael stepped closer. I'm not asking you to understand everything yet, he said, but I need you to see me, even if I stay hidden. Elin met his gaze. I already do. That night, a storm swept across the palace. The wind howled through the corridors, lanterns flickered, curtains danced like ghosts. Elin stayed in the tea room, grinding roots and sorting scrolls. Kael sat nearby, silent as usual, a book resting on his lap but unopened. Finally, she broke the silence. Do you remember the day they hurt you? He looked up. Yes. Do you remember who? He didn't answer. Elin stood and moved to sit beside him, not too close, but not far. You don't have to carry everything alone. Kael looked at her slowly. Everyone I've trusted has turned on me. She didn't flinch. Then I'll be the one who doesn't. The wind rattled the wooden shutters. Kael reached for his mask, and for the first time he hesitated. Elin. She placed a hand over his. No, she whispered. Not yet. Only when you're ready. He held her gaze for a long time, and then he lowered his hand. The next morning, something changed. Elin was walking through the outer corridor when a folded piece of parchment slid beneath her door. She opened it carefully. One line, no name. They are watching you now. Her heart tightened. She looked up. Outside, the corridor was empty, but she could feel it. The eyes, the whispers, the shift in air. Someone in the palace didn't want her close to Kael, and they knew she was already too close. She tried to act normal. She prepared his tea, she cleaned the pavilion. She smiled when he spoke, but Kael noticed. He always did. You're holding your breath, he said softly that night. Elin shook her head. It's nothing. He tilted his head. I don't believe you. She looked down. Someone left me a message. Kael's body grew still. What did it say? That I'm being watched. His eyes narrowed. Describe the handwriting. She did. Kael said nothing for a long time. Then he stood and crossed the room. Pack your things, he said. Elin blinked. What? Why? You're moving into the main quarters. Her voice caught. But won't that make it worse? Kael turned back to her. It will make you safer. She didn't argue. That night, under the cover of darkness, she moved her belongings to a larger room near Kael's own. It was warmer, quieter, and filled with the scent of old books and cedarwood. There were no guards posted outside, but she no longer felt invisible. She felt claimed, protected, seen. And for the first time in her life, that didn't scare her. It comforted her. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Elin worked by Kael's side, tending to his health, organizing the pavilion's herbs, reading him scrolls aloud when the rain kept them indoors. No one disturbed them. The outside world felt distant, but tension still lingered beneath the surface, like a string pulled too tight. Kael grew quieter, not colder but thoughtful, as if planning something or remembering something painful. She didn't press, she only stayed. That was what he needed. Someone who didn't ask for answers. Someone who didn't run. One morning, while placing dried leaves on the shelf, Elin noticed a small wooden box on the table. It hadn't been there the night before. It was simple, dark wood, no lock. She opened it carefully. Inside was a hair ribbon, deep blue, embroidered with silver thread in the shape of a dragon winding through clouds. It shimmered in the light. She touched it gently. Behind her, Kael's voice spoke. It was my mother's. She wore it when she walked in the garden. Elin turned. He was standing near the doorway, arms crossed. She wasn't royal by birth, he said, but when she wore that ribbon, no one dared question who she was. Elin closed the box slowly. I can't accept this. You already did, he said, when you chose to stay. She looked at him. At the steady way he stood, half in shadow, half in sunlight. There were so many things she wanted to say, but only one left her lips. Thank you. Kael nodded once. Then, in a voice lower than usual, he said, You make this place feel like hers again. That night, Elin sat near the window of her new room. The ribbon lay folded on her lap. She didn't wear it, not yet. It still felt too heavy, too sacred, but she held it close. The moon rose slowly. Somewhere in the trees, a nightbird called. And for the first time in her life, Elin Hua felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The peace, however, did not last. 2 mornings later, Kael was called to the inner palace. He hadn't been summoned in months. Now, suddenly, the emperor requested his presence. Elin helped him prepare in silence. She brushed dust from his sleeves, straightened the line of his collar, tied his sash with care. When her hands brushed against his robe, he placed his fingers gently over hers. Elin, he said, I don't want you to leave the pavilion today. She looked up. Is something wrong? He hesitated. I don't know yet. She nodded. I'll wait here. Kael stepped back. He reached for his mask but stopped. Then he said, If I don't return by nightfall. No, she interrupted, you'll return. He studied her face. And then, without another word, he placed the mask over his mouth and walked out the door. The day crawled. Elin cleaned the same shelf 3 times. She reheated the tea twice. She checked the garden window again and again. Nothing. No footsteps. No guards. No Kael. Dusk arrived, soft and orange. Still, he didn't return. Then, just as the last light faded from the sky, the doors opened. He entered, shoulders tight, robe slightly torn at the edge. Elin ran to him. You're hurt. Not badly, he said, just noise. He sank into the chair, removing his mask with a sigh. She knelt beside him, checking the scrape on his arm, the bruise beneath his collar. What happened? Kael looked at her. They want me to give up this pavilion to move back into the main court. Why now? Because I'm too quiet, too hard to read. That scares them. Elin touched his wrist gently. What did you say? I said no. She smiled softly. Good. Kael leaned back, closing his eyes. And what will you do if they make me choose? She blinked. Choose between what? He opened his eyes and looked at her. Between power and peace. Elin swallowed. Then I hope you choose what your heart needs. He nodded. Slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him. Kael reached out and held her hand. Not by accident, not in passing, but because he wanted to. After that night, something changed. They didn't speak about it. There was no need. The way Kael looked at her when she entered the room. The way Elin's breath caught when his fingers brushed hers. Everything said more than words ever could. He began to share more with her. Small things. Pieces of his life no one else had seen. A favorite poem folded in an old scroll. A letter he had written but never sent. A wooden carving he made as a child. This, he said, holding the figure in his hand, was supposed to be a phoenix. Elin smiled. It looks more like a sleepy duck. Kael laughed. Really laughed. And the sound was soft and beautiful and rare. She would remember forever. But the shadows outside their world were growing. Servants whispered more now. She felt eyes on her back when she passed through quiet halls. Even Jin, Kael's loyal guard, spoke with more caution. They fear what they don't control, he told her one morning. And you are unpredictable. Elin wasn't sure if that was a warning or a compliment. Maybe both. That evening, as the lanterns flickered in the garden, Kael found her beneath the tree with the twisted trunk. Elin, he said, voice quiet. She turned. I may be called away soon. Her heart sank. Where? There's a border dispute, he said. My brothers think I should go as a gesture of loyalty. Will you? He hesitated. If I refuse, they'll use it as proof that I've turned my back on the Empire. And if you go, they might make sure I never return. Elin looked away, her throat tight. "What do you want to do?" Kael stepped closer. "I want to stay here, with you." She met his eyes. "And I want you safe." A long silence passed between them. Then softly he said, "Come with me." She blinked. "What?" "If I must leave," he said, "I want you there. Not as a servant, not as a healer, just Elin." Her hands trembled. "You'd risk that?" "I already have." That night she stood by her window looking at the stars. The box with the ribbon still sat on her table. She opened it, held the fabric in her hands, and for the first time, she tied it in her hair. The next day, a formal message arrived from the imperial court. The fourth prince was ordered to appear before the council at dawn. Kael read the scroll in silence. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "I'll go." Elin didn't argue. She only stood beside him as he dressed, helping him fasten each layer with care. When he reached for his mask, she stopped him gently. "No," she said. "Let them see you." Kael looked at her, really looked, then nodded. He entered the council chamber with his head high, robes clean, mask gone. The room went still. Elin waited outside, breath held, hands cold. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, the doors opened. Kael stepped out, alone, his expression unreadable. Elin ran to him. "Well?" He looked at her and with a quiet smile said, "They listened." Later, as the day faded into soft gold, Kael took her hand and led her back to the old tea house. "This is where I first let you see me," he said. She nodded. He turned to her. "And now, I want to ask you something." Elin's heart pounded. "Anything." Kael reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small band of silk. "Blue and silver like the ribbon. I have no crown to offer," he said. "No throne, just myself, and the peace we found in this broken place." Elin's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than I ever dreamed." He tied the silk around her wrist. A quiet promise. Unspoken, unbreakable. Seasons changed. The winds of the palace turned warmer. And the name of the fourth prince, once whispered with doubt, was now spoken with quiet respect. Kael did not return to the court in full. He stayed in the pavilion, chose silence over ceremony, reflection over power, and Elin Hua stayed with him, not as his healer, not as his servant, but as the one person who knew his story and loved him anyway. Some mornings they walked through the garden before dawn. Elin picked herbs. Kael carried her basket. They spoke little. They didn't need to. There was comfort in the stillness, and every time he looked at her, Elin saw more of the man behind the mask. The boy who had been forgotten, the prince who had been betrayed, the soul who had found his way back through kindness and quiet love. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the emperor. It was short, a formal seal, a respectful tone. It granted Kael full freedom to choose his residence, his title, and the woman he wished to keep by his side. He read it once, then handed it to Elin. She read it slowly, then looked up. "What does this mean?" Kael smiled. "It means no one will question where you belong anymore." She folded the letter with care. "I never needed their permission." "I know," he said, "but I wanted you to have it." Time passed, gently. People came and went from the palace. The old emperor grew quiet. New names rose in the council halls. But in the garden near the forgotten pavilion, two figures could often be seen. One in faded green robes, the other in soft blue, his mask resting on a nearby table, untouched. They never held a public ceremony. No feast, no parade. But every year on the day they first met beneath the old cherry tree, Kael gave Elin a new ribbon. Always blue, always embroidered by hand. And she wore each one with quiet pride. Not because they marked her as his, but because they reminded her of the moment she offered water to a stranger, and received a future she had never dared imagine. Years later, when stories were told of the veiled prince and the quiet woman who walked beside him, no one could quite explain how she had changed him. There was no dramatic moment, no grand rescue, just a bowl of water, a healing hand, a voice that didn't ask for anything, only gave, and that was enough.
If this story touched your heart the way it touched his, don't leave without sharing it. Like, comment, and subscribe for more quiet romances where love blooms in whispers, not in noise. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the softest ones.